Hi, hello. So, this is part one of a four-part mini series on the topic of how to get a good night's sleep. I am asked by so many of my clients and colleagues and friends, how do I switch off? How do I get to sleep easier? What do I do when I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep? And especially through this very stressful time, many of us are experiencing some disturbances in our sleep. So, a framework that I used myself when I went through a period of time where I really struggled to sleep was to look at nature and especially the seasons. So if you think of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, if I had to ask you, well, which season would you link to sleep? You're probably likely to say, well, winter, because it's kind of like when we think of hibernation and resting and it's cold and dark. And that's exactly right. So, part four, we'll take a look at winter, which is all about when you're actually in bed under your duvet. How do you ensure that you really get to sleep and stay asleep and wake up rested? Part three, we'll take a look at the lead up to winter, which is autumn. And part three is probably going to be the most important one. And we'll talk about how you can ensure that you have a proper wound down from your very busy day, which is summer, into the period of time where you want to sleep. We'll also look at what do you do when you're like a busy bee in the middle of the day and you're being very productive and switched on, because they're key things that you can do during your day to help you ensure that you get a good night's sleep. And then, because it's always good to start at the beginning, and the way we start our day often determines how we end our day. So I'd like this episode, the next 10 minutes, to be around how do we use the analogy of spring, which is like the start of our day. So whether you're a morning person or not, when you wake up in the morning, you might still have a little bit of, I don't know, mist or brain fog, and it'll take you a bit of time to warm up. However, if you're waking up with this device as an alarm and you're like hitting the snooze button a few times, and then like while you're in bed, jumping onto social media and scrolling and maybe answering like the 14 WhatsApps that came through overnight, and maybe you're jumping into your inbox and you're looking at emails, what happens is immediately your ego switched on, you start putting on masks, we start engaging with the outside world, we can get triggered into the stress response because you have no control over what comes into your space, right? You don't know what's happened in the news overnight, you don't know what's in your inbox, you don't know who's going to send you what kind of message, and then you can start producing adrenaline, maybe even some cortisol, and then you've got this like downward spiral. And we have enough stress, guys. So the whole idea, especially if you want to enjoy a rest, because we know how vital sleep is for overall well-being, is to try and reduce the amount of stress that we're exposed to, and especially cortisol, which is an anti-inflammatory aging hormone. You don't want that stuff in your system for too long. So what can you do? When you wake up in the morning, if you are using this device, I'll question that. Is it possible for you to not have your device charging next to the bed at night? Could you keep it in the living room perhaps? Could you just buy a regular alarm clock to wake you up? Just stay curious. I think curiosity is a very important aspect of keeping a growth mindset and being able to discover things that we may not have thought was possible. Then, if you are using this phone, could it be your phone, not my phone, of course? Could you make sure, like I do, I keep my phone on flight mode and all my apps are switched off until a certain time in the morning when they come on? So even if I use my phone as an alarm, I'm not tempted to then see what's come through at night, because I know that it's only going to come through at 7:30. Of course, I can override it if I have a really important meeting or I've got to get up super early or there's something that's on my mind. But the idea is when you first wake up in the morning, the bridge between the conscious mind and the subconscious is still quite blurry. It's not clearly defined. So it's a very sacred, almost spiritual time where you can spend some time thinking about dreams if you remember your dreams. And if you don't, this is a good way to start, is when you wake up, as you move from deep delta and theta brainwaves into alpha before you wake up and fully functioning in beta, that alpha brainwave is a bit like daydreaming. It's a beautifully creative space. It's a lovely space to linger. So could you lie in bed and think about remembering your dreams? The more you do that, the easier it'll be to actually remember them. And you could maybe keep a dream journal. It can be very interesting, especially if you take it to potentially a dream coach or a therapist and work through the symbolism, perhaps. I know a lot of people use dreams to give them answers to important questions. And I just find my dreams actually quite amusing. Another thing you could do when you wake up in the morning is maybe keep a gratitude journal. I've been doing that for quite a while now. What's so lovely about my journal is that I've been keeping it for like 4 years and I'm on to year 5. So when I wake up, I just spend about 3, maybe 5 minutes reflecting on the day before, and I think about what went right. Like, no matter how bad a day is, like even if I had a really cool cup of coffee, like there's going to be one thing, and often there ends up being 3 or 4 or 5 things, and I write that down. Do you know what a cool way that is to start your day? You're producing like oxytocin, some feel good chemicals like serotonin and dopamine, and it just helps you feel a little bit more in control. For those of you that play a musical instrument, I tried. I got a guitar and I did a few lessons, and I can't play the guitar. But what I do remember from the lessons was how important it is to tune the guitar every time you play. So even if I played the day before, I had to tune it. And it always got me thinking, like, your body is like a musical instrument, right? And how you tune your body, this musical instrument, at the start of the day can determine how melodious or how much harmony you have in the music that you produce. I mean, go with the analogy, it works for me. And I know this as a dietitian, when I was in clinical practice and I worked with a lot of people who had diabetes, I noticed a trend that my patients who got up in the morning and who maybe did a little bit of light stretching or went for a walk, maybe did a bit of mindfulness and had a good breakfast. So they really tuned their body well in the morning. They really were able to regulate their blood glucose a lot better than somebody who like woke up, had a double espresso, jumped onto social media, went into the stress response, and then tried to have like a healthy lunch and catch up in the afternoon. So that's another compelling reason to think about that. So we have a few more minutes before I'm going to wrap up the call, because if you are watching this live, ideally you should have an hour at least, possibly 2, of screen-free time, so no digital or external stimulus coming in order for you to be able to rest and go to bed. And I'd like to end with this poem, which was written about that very special time in the morning as we wake up. So it's a poem, I'll post it with this video. It's called Just Up by Stephen Baza. When we awaken, there is a moment before we remember the burdens that we bear, that yesterday we lost or won, a fortune or a battle or a love, before we remember that today we must go to work or to court or to hospital, or we have nowhere to go, before we start piecing together who we have been and who we will be. And in that moment, we are simply consciousness, sensation, appetite, not yet linked to any memory or will. I like the way we are in that naked moment before we are defined, in that briefest moment before we don ourselves. So I ask you, what is your spring like? When you start your day, before you get into the busy part of your day, which is the summer when we're all productive and switched on and fully functioning, are you allowing yourself that sacred space to gently come out of delta theta and to emerge into the world without triggering the stress response too early? And start small. If this is something that you don't do, maybe you could start with 10 or 15 minutes, like get up, make a cup of tea, get back into bed, or go sit by a window, drink, finish your warm drink, and then go onto your phone. Maybe you can make it 15 minutes, maybe even half an hour. Imagine that. And if you're already doing this, I celebrate you. And I ask you, what are you filling that time with? Could you put your well-being, something about your mental well-being, your emotional well-being, or your physical well-being first? It's these small things that we do, guys, small things that we are consistent at that really pay off huge dividends, like compound interest, like we get massive return on investment. So this is part 1, taking a look at how the season of spring could help you rethink the way that you start your day, because how you start determines how you can finish. And so part 2, the same time next week, we'll take a look at the season of summer and what you can do during your busy day to help you get a better night's rest. I'd love to hear from you. How are you managing with your sleep? Would you like to know more about this topic? If you're interested in receiving a sleep questionnaire from me, please just leave me a comment and I'll be sure to respond and give that to you. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Bonne nuit, sleep tight. Goeienacht.